Look, context is king, but no amount of it is gonna save my comment section. As yes, Marco is mentally 30 and dating a teenager, and I'm okay with that. Yeah, this is the hill I'm about to die on. Star versus the Forces of Evil is guilty of many, many shipping sins. The status of Marco's age remains one of the most bitterly debated topics in the show, as the man had a 16-year training arc, got jacked, came back to his home dimension, and was immediately de-aged back to his teen self, forever changing the discourse around Starco, as the fandom now had to deal with the fact that Marco Diaz might actually be a 30-plus-year-old man trapped in a 15-year-old's body and hooking up with teenagers, which on the face value is creepy and pretty fucked. However, just because something is problematic on the surface doesn't mean it's a problem, especially when the show can't decide if it's serious or not.
That's dimension.
Star versus the Forces of Evil is the story of a magical princess from another dimension who got kicked out of her home and is now forced to live on Earth with the Diaz family, where she has to deal with Earth stuff, monster attacks, and all sorts of magical shenanigans. Helping Star Butterfly through all this is her new housemate and future house husband, Marco Diaz. Now Marco is fine. He does karate, has a crush he's simping for, adds just the right amount of responsibility to Star's impulsiveness, all while being a dumb teenager who will get swept up in his own shit. But while season 1 of Star Vs was primarily episodic, fun adventure of the week type shit, it was steadily developed into a more serialized show with new, more dangerous enemies, friends, and a continually expanding world. One such example of this increased world building was the magic scissors. Turns out, someone made them, and she was pissed at Marco for abusing them. This is Hecuba. She dragged the boy to her dimension and told Marco he wasn't worthy. So, like all normal people, he would devote the next 16 years of his life to prove her wrong.
Who's a little boy now?
This dude spent 16 years in an anime, became a badass, got hot, all for some magic scissors. Naturally, they weren't going to leave one of the show's main characters to keep living his best life, so after one emotional plea from Star, he agrees to come back home.
No! My hot bod! Where did it go?
Where he discovers that 1 second back home was equal to 12 days in Hecapoos. So he had this massive, life-changing journey, and not even 8 minutes had passed back home. Now, something to keep in mind is that Marco, he is changed by this journey. He is not just 16 years, exact same person. When we see him, he has this macho confidence where he's just so casually flirting with Hecuba even though he is such a wreck when he's a teenager. This guy has the confidence of an action hero in a Michael Bay movie. He's been through some shit, and he has been changed completely by it. You can still see the hints of what Marco used to be, but this adult Marco does feel like he has actually lived through 16 years of life. But that is where the problem is. Marco has now lived close to 30 years, and he's just now back in his teenage body. Now, if he stepped through that portal, was changed back, and this had just removed all of Marco's memories of the events, all 16 years of him flirting with Hecuba, I would not be making this video. But what the show does instead is create an ambiguous situation where he both was and wasn't changed by the experience. The episode has a surprisingly somber ending, with Marco being unable to remember the password to his computer. It hits this perfect note of loss where Marco, after all the time he spent away, has changed. The life he lived was real, and even though he's physically back to normal, internally, we're left with the impression that something has changed. We're left with the idea that this has actually affected him. This ending scene leaves you with the idea that this wasn't something Marco was just going to brush off. The show, however, had other plans, as this is the only time that Marco's 16-year sabbatical is treated with any sort of tragedy or gravitas, which I could be fine with. This show was still heavily episodic at the time, and not everything that happens needs to have long-lasting consequences. Sometimes you just want to do cool shit and not have to worry about it. Final Space, another incredibly messy show, did this exact same thing. The crew crashed into a time crystal, splitting the ship in half, with little Kato, the Catboy, being trapped on one side while everyone else was on the other. Then, because of time dilation, Kato would spend the next 60 years alone and traumatized, before getting pulled back and changed back to his more marketable kid self. It ends with him having a massive breakdown at the end as he's free, but still mentally scarred by the experience. Then the show acts like nothing happened in the next episode. which was for the best. And I say this because these child characters going through these massive life-changing events, only to be reset to their child bodies, they would just effectively be new characters that the series would have to write around. If they were to commit to this, Marco's dynamic with Star would be completely different. His relationship with his parents would be completely different. Everything about him would be changed by this one episode. So to maintain the fun dynamic and to preserve Marco as a character, it really is narratively better for him to just forget those 16 years ever happened. And at first, that seemed like the game plan. And I loathe to bring in material or info that isn't in the show proper, the actor for Marco did an official in-character live stream, where Adam MacArthur, as Marco, told us that he doesn't remember his time in Hekapoo's dimension, comparing it to a distant childhood memory, aka he doesn't remember the training, he doesn't remember flirting with Hekapoo, he doesn't really remember all those years he spent away, freeing him up to just be his regular self, and this to me is the best way to deal with it. Don't have him go through a ton of character development off screen. Keep him mentally 15, and his crush on Star will remain normal teen boys level of creepy. I would prefer if this was just outright stated in the show, instead of a random ass live stream. However, I will take the peace of mind where I can get it. But then season 3 happened. Then Star Versus tried to have its cake and eat it too.
You forget I have 16 years of experience fighting thousands of Hekapoos. Go ahead. Hit me with your best spell.
So here's where the headache actually begins. Marco has a subtle personality shift in season 3, becoming actually excited about fighting, risking his life, and otherwise becoming the more self-indulgent one, in contrast to Star, who has become way more responsible. This shift leads him to become discontent with his life on Earth. He misses the danger of going on adventures with Star, who at this point has returned home. This shift in his character has put strain on all of his relationships. His friends don't really want to hang out with him anymore. His girlfriend Jackie breaks up with him as she recognizes he can't let go of this Muni stuff, that he's changed and it's just not going to work out. None of this has anything to do with him being mentally 30. It would make sense if it did, and if it happened earlier. However, the actual shift in Marco comes from the fact that he helped save Muni from an overhyped lizard. This wanderlust causes him to join Star and to become her squire, really though he's just her best friend again. Then when it's time to throw down, he reveals that he remembers everything. Like, this dissonance is what I mean when the show can't decide to take Marco's situation seriously. The show decides after season 2 that no, it actually likes the idea of Marco getting these badass skills, but just doesn't want the narrative baggage of having him actually change from the experience. Like, the dude starts fighting with swords, riding his dragon cycle, going on adventures with Hekapoo on his off time where he becomes an adult, with him even going so far as to remember the friends that he made and details about the world when he goes back. The show explicitly states that he remembers a lot of shit. There is no hazy memories here. He remembers everything as the plot demands, as while he doesn't biologically show it, he contains at least 30 years worth of life experience that got up to 50 when he decided to stay for another 20 years. But, and this is the most important part, everything else about his personality remains the same. If he feels more confident now, it's not because he spent 16 years competing with one of the most powerful beings in the multiverse, it's because he punched a guy's heart out and led a resistance. And this isn't a case of, oh, he just remembers the skills. We even have a moment in season 3 where Marco's parents realize how much they don't know their son, and in writing, Star marks his true age as 25 to 35.
How old are you? A, 0 to 15, B, 16 to 25, C, 26 to 35.
The other characters in the show acknowledge that he is way older than he looks. So people aren't technically wrong when they say that Marco is mentally an adult who dates children. Which, yikes! God, this is what I mean by this is a massive headache. As these moments are far and few between, it is not constantly telling us like, oh yeah, Marco, he's 35. No, his default is a confused, lovesick teenager. He is, for all intents and purposes, 15, who just really likes fighting and is good at it. That is his default, that is how he is written. But at the same time, it gives us conclusive evidence that Marco is not what he seems. And this whole weird back and forth is what makes this whole discussion of what age Marco really is a massive headache. As it would be cool, I would be fine if they let him go back and be buff Marco again. He looks dope. And if he went back, yeah, he'll get all of his memories. Marco's character isn't written like he's an adult or even a man-child. He's written to be his age, but there's just enough instances where the show looks you in the eye, concretely tells us that he remembers those years he spent in the ab dimension, only for those episodes to pass, and the stand writing of the show makes you forget that it's even a thing. The show treats this situation like a quirk, like suspension, disbelief, and all that, but no one thought through, hey, maybe this might be a little bit weird. Which begs the real question, when do we take this situation seriously? As the show never treats Marco like an actual adult. The way he is written never changes. But at the same time, it loves to throw in the fact that, oh yeah, he's really 30. No massive change, just a wink and a cute nod. Now personally, I'm fine with it. I can live with the dissonance of a show trying to be cute, not taking Marco's real age that seriously, even though if you think about it from the perspective of a 50-year-old man in a child's body dating a teenager, it's very yikes. But it's also a situation where there isn't a real-life issue that this reflects. This physically can't happen outside of catfishing, which this is not. On the surface, the situation sounds way more problematic than it actually is portrayed in the show, as everything about how Marco and Star interacts tells us that they are just dumb teenagers in a stupid love triangle. This isn't self-insert fanfiction for a grown man dating underage girls. The show is just blasé about it, and it's weird. It feels like the show never fully thought through the implications of this, and just kind of went, oh yeah, neat powers, fun little gag, and that's about it. But really, it is a massive overcomplication that makes talking about Starco way more of a headache than it already is. As yes, it's 100% true, but also don't worry about it. Like, it would be easy if they just said in the show that Marco doesn't really remember his time in the other dimension, but fully remembers when he goes back. Boom, done. 30% less weird. It's a solid answer most people will live with. But we don't get that though, which makes us fall back to the issue of when are we supposed to take these situations seriously, especially when the show isn't. As depiction is not endorsement. You can have fascist empires or show people being abusive, but that doesn't mean it endorses or approves of those behaviors. And I talked a little about this in my Blitz Fatherhood video on Hell of a Boss. Just because a show has a bunch of violent slapstick doesn't automatically make it abusive. Sometimes a furry daughter is beating the shit out of her dad in the background. Sometimes a guy is being crushed by an elevator. It's kind of a gag. And when the show is actually taking abuse seriously, it will let you know. But this is also a case-by-case basis. Because I know when Hell of a Boss wants me to take an issue seriously. Starverse is, though, it's a little bit murkier. And some issues need to be taken seriously even if the show doesn't. However, I think the worst part of this whole situation is that right now in the world, media literacy has taken a massive L. These issues and topics surrounding media will be boiled down to just a headline that doesn't properly convey the issue. Yet people will still run with it, distorting the problem and drowning out the actual discussion on what the hell is going on here. As yeah, I do think that they could have handled Marco's age differently. They could have written themselves out of this weird scenario while keeping Marco's cool factor. As even if he just lived a power fantasy for those 16 years, that's still 16 years of life experience that changes you as a person. People change when they get older, but Marco didn't. And if this had just been a one-off, we could all live with it. But it's brought up frequently. The show benefits by making Marco a badass from this episode. And this leaves Marco in this weird area where it's true,
I got this sword from the mists of the Never Zone when I was in my early 30s.
but it's also not a problem, and I kind of hate that. Marco views himself as being in his 30s, and everything about this is just fucking weird. Love the episode where he gets ripped, they're consistently fun. I just don't think that this is worth the headache, as having to explain this just derails any conversation you have about the show. It's why I didn't bring it up in my first Star versus shipping video, as you can really just remove it, and nothing about his character changes. It's nebulous, it's weird, and I don't love that a show already struggling with dumb drama also has to have this burning at the top of the pile. If you watch it, you understand that it isn't really a problem, but it's still canon, which is a lot. So let me know what you all think. Like, I'm genuinely curious what other people's opinion on this are. Do you not care? Do you really care? At what level does a show have a free pass to not take something seriously while still using it in a story? As I totally get why people call this a plot hole, that he doesn't act his real age. I just don't think that the show would survive if they dip into that one. But that's all for now. Do everything else, like, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff. Bitches, bros, non-binary hoes, goodbye.